Okay, everybody, welcome back to Your Crisis Coach with Scott H. Silverman and myself, Fred Carroll. Today, Scott, you got a friend with you, so why don't you introduce, well, first of all, how are you, Scott, of course?
Oh, my goodness, it must be really hot there. Your brain isn't working today, Fred. I'm well, thank you, and thanks for asking. I think I shared with you, I went to the dentist this morning, so the whole left side of my face is a little numb, which, my wife likes because I can't talk. So it's the first time I've been speaking all day. So thank you guys for putting up with me. Things are going well. Weather's warming up. We're in the mid 70s here. Just beautiful.
Yeah, me and Michael don't want to hear that.
I know. Well, I have a responsibility. I told you that. I grew up here. I'm a native. They always like us talking about the zoo, the weather, and not to talk about the price of housing. So those are the three real main criteria.
So Scott, real quick, Scott, tell me what, when a former addict goes for medical stuff like a dentist and stuff, what kind of painkillers can you take?
Well, I can take whatever, is prescribed if it's prescribed. I don't need painkillers for this work. But, for example, when I went for a colonoscopy, I had propanol and fentanyl, medically induced. And, it was a small amount for a short amount of time. And it's in the pharmaceutical form. So it's IV. And, it's not something that triggers something for me. I mean, I disclosed it on my pre-op. They knew that. And, the doses are small enough just to put you under. But there are people who go through surgery and, they need Oxycontin, for example, for a period of time defined by their medical experts. And, I don't even know, maybe, Michael, you might, but you can't talk until we introduce you about whether the new fentanyl ruling out of the feds, I read that it kind of eliminates doctors prescribing it. But anyway, but I'm doing fine, Fred. How are you doing? And we'll get to our guest because we don't know how long this guy, he's so famous.
Get to the guest because I'm having some audio issues. But you run with it. Go ahead.
Okay. So Michael Brown, just so we all know, he's not Jewish, as far as I know. But that's the only thing the guy isn't. Anyway, Michael and I go back, I don't know how many years now, Michael. It's been a few years. I think you were just getting out of high school and graduating from, your primary education. And you've been a great resource for me. And we've communicated on a variety of different levels around the opioid crisis and the fentanyl crisis and, what's going on. But obviously, and you're going to share about your profession so people know that, your bio is pretty esteemed when it comes to the knowledge around the cartels and globally what's going on. And of course, being former DEA, you worked in the industry for a long time. And, and as you and I've shared, I was on the other side of the industry. I'm a retired unlicensed pharmacist. So I never really wanted to meet guys like you back in my day. But, you've done a lot and you're traveling a lot. And I know you speak to people globally. So please share a little bit about who you are, what's going on, and maybe give us kind of a snapshot, here in mid 2025, what's taking place globally with the cartel. Because I know people are curious because we unfortunately get most of our information, it sounds like, from the criminal justice side, which is after they've made they've made a seizure or they've arrested somebody for distributing, but they don't really talk about the trends. What's going on with the cartels. I mean, because people think now that the borders are shut down, there's no more issues with fentanyl, and fentanyl's a poison that anybody can make. And I talk about that all the time when I get a chance. So, Michael, tell us about you, the work you do, and then we'll kind of, rivet down to some of the things that I get asked all the time, if you don't mind. Thanks, buddy. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here. And I'm glad we had a practice rehearsal run about a week ago. Michael just blew us off and went somewhere else with his expertise for the week. So we're really glad you made it back. And it's really good. Again, it's good to see you. So thanks for being here and take it away. It's all yours.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for the invitation. Like you said, we go back almost 2 years. You were formerly on my podcast called The Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole. And then we've been communicating and liaisoning for the last 2 years on a whole host of issues, from homelessness to drug addiction. And we ended our last conversation with it seems like bad policy is really the enemy of the American people. But as you said, I'm a former senior DEA agent retired after 32 years. I spent roughly 25 years working in the overseas environment. I had a chance to attend and go through Fort Benning Special Forces training. And then I was deployed to Central and South America, where I did boots on the ground interdiction, working with host country special forces to mitigate the direct threat going after clandestine cocaine labs, airstrips, precursor chemical depots, cocaine stash sites, and fugitives. So for 4 years, I ran through the jungles with other agents and host country nationals and other intelligence agencies that we really can't mention. But we had an effective operation. And it was so effective that the countries of Bolivia, Colombia, and Peru really pulled us back and said, "You're doing too good a job." So those programs went to the wayside. And after that, I spent 2 tours in Pakistan, roughly 10 years, working in the Middle East, focusing on narco-terrorism, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda, who were heavily involved in heroin and methamphetamine trafficking from a point of view of taxing the traffickers. So that's how they made significant amount of their counterterrorism funding came from taxing the narcotics traffickers and other criminal organizations. Spent a year in Afghanistan after 9/11 working with the 101st Airborne, doing intelligence collection. I then was promoted and spent 4.5 years in Southeast Asia working out of the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, where I covered all of Southeast Asia from the Maldives, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Again, tracking Afghani heroin coming from Pakistan down the coastline into Southeast Asia. Following that, I did 2 years in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, where I really fell in love with going after precursor chemicals. That's where I developed my skill sets and understanding that the center of gravity concerning all narcotics, semi-synthetics and synthetics, all goes back to China and their supply of global precursor chemical to make narcotics. In Myanmar, I assisted the counterpart with developing new technologies called Raman spectroscopy, which is basically a fancy word for handheld laser that we purchased that could identify unknown chemicals coming across the board from China, which were later to methamphetamine labs in the jungles of Myanmar. Within 2 months of introducing that new technology, counterparts were seizing 6 to 7 tons of precursors a month that they had previously had missed because they didn't know what was coming into their country. So really the introduction of advanced Raman technology was the best mitigating tool they could have. It wasn't guns and bullets and high-speed operations and extradition. It was simply the introduction of technology to counter the precursors coming into the country. So after that program, I spent 2 years in headquarters working on the transnational organized crime task force, of which we were targeting the fentanyl precursors. That's where I really got introduced to the fentanyl and opioid epidemic. Following my retirement in 2020, a company called Ragaku, who made the analytical units I purchased for Myanmar, they hired me as the director for counter drug technology and strategic development. Now I work in a global capacity as a law enforcement consultant on how to integrate Raman technology into existing law enforcement strategies, as well as consult on current narcotic situations, Europe, Southeast Asia, United States, and Central South America. And there's a lot going on in counter Scott, as you know, it is pulling up the globe.
Let me thank you. You sound like you stayed really busy, and you've seen things and been places that most people have never even thought existed, and what's going on there. Let me ask a goofy question, because when I hear the president say that we're talking to Mexico, we're going to send down federal troops, we're going to empower our military to go there and put an end to what's going on with the cartel. And then I don't know if it's Mexico that says that that's not the way we do it, that's not going to work. Or why is it, do you think, that the U.S., since I think we're one of the bigger targets of the cartel as far as distribution and manufacturing and getting the narcotics here because we're a big consumer. But why is it, do you think that, and you may know why, Mexico and the United States can't seem to work together in a way that decreases the incentive for the cartel to sell their product here, other than the fact there's billions of dollars and maybe there's not such a thing as an incentive from Mexico and the U.S. But why aren't we working together to slow this thing down? And I think there will be people who criticize me and say, hey, the DEA is making some big bust. Well, of course they are. But the rule of thumb is what? They catch maybe 10% and the other 90% gets through. And I hear the 10% is a high number. And who really knows? Because how do you measure that? I mean, how do you actually know if you don't know what originally was manufactured and was brought to a distribution point, and then you know how much was captured against how much was made? How do they even measure that? That's a guesstimation, obviously. But back to the primary question. Why can't the U.S. and Mexico work together to slow this down?
I learned working overseas at the embassy is that DEA is just another agency in the embassy. Any operation or any relationship overseas to the embassy, it's referred to as bilateral relationship, right? So within that bilateral relationship is the overall relationship the United States has with the country, and what DEA does in that country is based on what that country allows us to do. So in Central and South America, when I was there in my time in the 90s, we could actually go out into the jungles with those operation teams and put hands-on, boots on the ground. That's all changed, especially in Mexico. You remember back in the day when Kiki Camarena, before he was kidnapped and murdered by members of the cartels in conjunction with the government, Kiki Camarena was allowed to go out. He went into the field, he did surveillance, made arrests. It was hands-on. But recently, within the last 10 years or so, the Mexican government has pulled back and said, especially under the former president, President Obrador, said DEA is no longer allowed to go out and work in the field. You have to work in an intelligence capacity, and all the information you get has to go to us to vet, and then we'll execute that information. Well, of course, we all know the Mexican government is not, if not completely corrupt, the major parts of it are corrupted, and it prevents us from getting anything done. And what's interesting, if you look at the history of drug trafficking and governments in Central and South America, let's just say Colombia and Peru back in the day of Escobar, when cocaine was being produced, Escobar was able to bribe and corrupt the Colombian government at the highest levels because they were just taking the money. It was easy. We'll take his money, let him sell his drugs to the United States. Doesn't matter. But over the years, that money payoff became ingrained. It became part of the economy. Escobar was worth $30-some billion, according to Forbes. That money came into Colombia, circulated to the banking community, construction, hotels, entertainment. That money became part of the Colombian economy. And then Pablo Escobar decided he didn't want to be a drug trafficker. He wanted to be a politician. And that's when the Colombian government says, oh, wait a minute, we'll take your money, but you can't come to dinner and sit down with us. You are not like us. We do not want you at our table. And that's when Escobar went to war with the government and became a narco-terrorist. Same thing happened in Peru. Same thing happened in Mexico. Under the Guadalajara cartel, which was the first cartel in Mexico, the government took the money. It's easy. We'll take the money. They sell their drugs to the United States. Doesn't affect us. But as all viruses grow, they become more deadly. And the cartels in Mexico have now metastasized to what I call a stage 5 cartel, meaning they are so intertwined and embedded in the government, in the economy, in every industry, that it would be almost impossible to remove them, for Mexico to extricate themselves from that relationship without the entire economy collapsing and affecting U.S. trade. So really, it comes down to dollars and cents. What would it cost America to divorce itself from Mexico's economic trade, which is worth $5 to $6 trillion a year, right? So if you got rid of all the cartels, you would immediately pull out $30 to $50 billion, and you would crash the economy. The cartels employ over 200,000 people in Mexico and in the United States. So suddenly all those people don't have an economy. There's no jobs. The entire country would collapse. What's interesting, no one looks at it from a financial point of view. We all look at it as, hey, let's just go arrest some bad guys and end the problem. It's just not that simple. It's much, much more complicated. But there are other mitigation efforts, in my opinion. You mentioned sending troops in. That would work in some aspect, but it would have they would have significant pushback from the cartels, which I believe would just significantly affect the American people, our soldiers on the ground, and the economy.
Did you say that the cartel employs over 200,000 people?
The last estimates I saw, 175 to 200,000. I suspect it's more. When you think of,
I assume it's all around the distribution, manufacturing business. It's not running restaurants or cruise lines or anything else.
You have front companies, right? You may have a front company that's construction that launder hundreds of millions of dollars. You may have restaurants and other companies that receive precursor chemical parcels from China. You have people who receive those parcels and take them to somebody else, who takes them to somebody else, who takes them to a lab. You have your lab operators, right? Mexico still produces heroin. You have thousands of people working in poppy fields. You have people working at the ports. You have people you have to pay off. Police, the customs, people in the government. There's a whole supply chain. It's an underground economy that's enormous. And then you have people in the United States that work for the cartels, front companies, distributors, precursor chemical people. The list goes on and on.
So in theory, if someone were to have a prayer meeting and say, okay, globally, we're going to stop manufacturing and distributing just fentanyl, we'll say, okay, not even including cocaine. In reality, the tsunami of the economic deficit would be so great, it would not only put the U.S. in trouble, but other parts of the world as well. I mean, you've got transportation, shipping, and all of the recipients, the families that work for the cartel. And of course, the businesses, the silent economy here. I don't even know if there's such a thing as a number of what volume of business is actually done in the billions here with people consuming illicit drugs. Do you know what that figure looks like?
I don't think you put a number on that figure. It's so large. I mean, if you think about all the precursor chemicals that go from China to Central and South America for cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine production, that's all maritime. I think last year Europe maybe sees 40 metric tons. Every year it's hundreds of metric tons. That's a lot of precursors. So your maritime transportation organizations are the unwitting winners. They're making millions of dollars by transporting precursor chemicals and weapons, and they don't even know it. Your international parcel carriers who take all the fentanyl parcels to Mexico via Alaska, those companies are making millions of dollars in increased parcel distribution to Mexico just in fentanyl alone.
Do you think we can convince Trump to try to get a tariff on the cartel and on China? Would that ever happen?
I mean, you look at China, according to the FBI and everyone else in the intelligence community, is our number one strategic threat. They are stealing our intelligence. They're spying on us. Their best interest is the demise of America. So the more precursor chemicals and drugs that come into the U.S., the more greater destabilization, the more I think the PRC is content. As you see now, Trump administration is trying to go after the marijuana farms that have been bought up by the Chinese, all the land that's been bought up by the Chinese students who are in fact part of the larger CCP spy network, right? They are required to report the information that they see here in America. So I think Trump is waking America up to the fact that China is not our friend, but it is a significant global partner, our biggest trading partner. And again, to unplug from the massive manufacturing tentacles China has into the United States would cause significant price increases. Are the American people ready to pay more?
So if you were put in charge of illegal substances and not disrupting, but interrupting and putting an end to what comes into the U.S., if you had a magic wand, what do you think would need to be done simultaneously? I mean, obviously, it's like fake news. I mean, how are you going to get China and Mexico and the other countries, and then, of course, all the drug seekers who continue to consume illicit substances? So, what would you do if you were in charge? And it wouldn't matter. You could name your own price tag, build your own team, and given let's say a 10-year runway, what would you do?
Yeah, it's. Let me explain to you what I consider the five critical capabilities that the cartels need to function. One is communication, right? The ability to communicate with transnational criminal organizations around the world, communicate with the precursor chemical suppliers. Two, the ability to procure and transport those precursors from China and India to those clandestine labs in Mexico. Three, the ability to produce fentanyl and successfully smuggle across the border. For U.S. distribution, and five, the repatriation of drug money back into the United States. Now, all of those capabilities require, the first two require significant bilateral relationships with China and Mexico. Don't have those, it's not going to work. Finding out and disrupting billions of dollars in money laundering, which is also run by the Chinese, very difficult to dismantle. It's too hard to do. Take that one off the board. Going after precursor chemical labs in Mexico requires U.S. intervention. Perhaps U.S. forces go in. That's going to cause a whole series of diplomatic issues. Can't do that. So what's the last critical capability? Cross-border smuggling. Right now, we know the cartels are smuggling more than 95 to 98% of all narcotics, to include fentanyl, into the United States, hidden in vehicles, commercial vehicles, private vehicles, and cargo. The rest goes tunnels and submersibles. But the primary bulk of it is smuggled in through vehicles and cargo. Now that also represents the most vulnerable capability. And the cartels know that. And what they're doing now is they're using the roughly 180 to 190,000 cars and cargo come into the United States every day as the haystack. The needles are those cars containing narcotics. They know customs can't search all those vehicles. I'm talking about traps, which are hidden compartments, so sophisticated that the drugs in those traps are sterilized. There's no scent for a dog to hit on. So if you don't have the advanced X-ray technology and advanced drug identification equipment, you're going to miss it. And we're missing it. What we see now seized is either what they want us to seize to take us off the scent, or it's the leftovers. It doesn't really impact them. So if, as you said, I was president for the next 5 years, I would reconfigure all the cross-border checkpoints, and I would determine how many vehicles and trucks could come into the country every day that we could check 100% the most advanced technology, scanners, radar, and X-ray. Whatever that number is, say, for example, Brownsville, with all the latest equipment and a 12-car lane and a special depot for trucks, we can check 5,000 vehicles a day. That's all that comes in the country. And those 5,000 vehicles have to go back into Mexico. Now, if we did that across the 2,000 or 2,500 mile border from California to Texas, we would reduce cross-border trafficking by 99%. So it doesn't matter how many chemicals they have, precursor chemicals, how many labs. They can't move the final product to market bulk. It doesn't matter. Addiction goes down. We increase investigations on the U.S. side. We roll up these domestic trafficking groups. As we do that, there's no resupply. Cut off the supply, and then we can begin to treat people in your field because there's no oversupply. But of course, the pushback would be where you're going to hurt the economy. You're going to kill U.S. trade. But that's the case. I mean, you have to think of the fentanyl crisis as a patient who walks into their doctor's office not feeling well. And the doctor says, "Oh man, you've got stage 4, stage 5 cancer. Your only option is radical radiation and chemo, and then you're going to be on life support the rest of your life. So your choice is live in pain or go with the cancer and eventually die." And that's the choice America has to make. Everybody wants an easy solution to an extremely complex and deadly problem. There just isn't one that's going to cost America in some form financially to come out the other side. So the choice comes down to the American people have to accept and normalize, hey, we're just going to lose 100,000 people every year to narcotics. Let's just get on with our lives. Or we suck it up. As we used to say in Ranger School, you got to embrace the suck, push through it, and come out the other side a little better off.
You know, when you articulate it that way, because I'm in San Diego, they have 95,000 crossings a day, and they claim that they're only really able to inspect 3 or 4%. So, and if they were to get to 20%, they said, nobody would get across the border to do what they need to do on this side and getting back home. So, and then when you talk about obviously the big business and what it could do to crush it. It sounds like if we could figure out a way to get a major percentage, 20% of what we spend, on the criminal side and put it on the prevention and treatment side, maybe we could slow down the demand, because it sounds like the supply is never going to stop. Why would it? I mean, you're part of a corporation and you're making, they're not paying people $500,000 that are working in the fields, but they probably could. But the people that run it, are making billions, if not tens of billions. They're not going to just go, we're going to go open up a McDonald's franchise and figure out how we can offset our losses. So I like the idea of education, prevention, and working on the slowing down the demand side. But I'm a guy in long-term recovery. I've been in the industry for 40 years. I don't see people anesthetizing themselves less. I see people self-medicating more, because the overall mental health of people, and of course, the way the country seems to be run right now, or the people running the country and how things are going at leadership level. Look at this Epstein thing, for example, and the lady that's in jail for 20 years and potentially going to get a pardon, or maybe, some sort of community sentence. It's like, where is the common sense of what we need to do today to really take care of our families, each other, our community? And, I just put those questions out there, not necessarily to be answered today, but I think we have a big, big battle that we're going to be fighting for quite some time. And when you tell the story your way, I think like, wow, prevention and slowing down the demand seems a lot easier than trying to convince 3 or 4 major international power brokers to slow down what they're doing, because they know what the product does, the end user. And that hasn't created a slowdown or a common sense piece. And I know that, the cartels modifying the way they're making their fentanyl so people don't overdose right away, but they can get addicted, and then other things can kick in. And we're watching methamphetamine grow at a rate, and the same thing with cocaine we haven't seen probably in a decade.
Yeah, but if you look at, I've been on the job for 32 years, and every year of that 32 years, I saw drug addiction increase, billions of dollars going towards awareness and education. It simply doesn't work. The human nature and its craving for narcotics, for a way out, especially now we see more, especially with young people, looking for alternative ways of self-medication to escape the reality of the world they live in for whatever reason. I didn't see that growing up in the 1980s and in the 70s and 80s. It's a completely different culture now, where you turn the TV on, you can get 18 different drugs on the internet through telemark, through teledoctors. So trying to address the oversupply with more awareness and education, you're not going to be able to save more than are going to be created every day. The cartels understand human nature more than we do. They're already moving from fentanyl to niazines, which is a synthetic, 10 to 20 times more powerful than fentanyl. You're seeing a reoccurrence of use of carfentanil, which is an elephant tranquilizer, maybe 100 times more powerful than fentanyl. So the cartels are already experimenting, looking down the road to, okay, what's the next more powerful synthetic drug we can put in the market to ensure that the people who are addicted stay addicted, and we can attract more people to that addiction, given the growing number of Americans who are desperate for a way out and self-medicate with alcohol and narcotics.
I wonder if they have conferences like we do, because you speak at a lot of conferences.
100%.
If you ever get invited to one of their conferences to listen to their best practices, and they want to talk to you as just as kind of a good faith thing. I mean, I tried, through our group, the Rotary group, that you'll be talking to Larry soon about getting a hold of somebody high ranking in Mexico to see if we can get the cartel to make a charitable contribution. Remember, you and I talked about this, to the U.S. for, to take some, like corporations do, take some of your profits, put it back into your major consumer pool, and help with education and prevention. And, sidebarring, you're right about, vaping has become such an issue with young people. And it's a technique of, putting marijuana and other illicit substances in. And I believe it was the federal court that just ruled in favor of, I think it's Juul, one of the largest vape manufacturers, that they can keep doing what they're doing. So it's like, how do we, you know,
You can't.
how,
I mean,
how do we process this in a way where we're trying to help save lives and generations, and the people that have the power? I mean, look what tobacco did for so long and what it took, and we usually I don't even really talk much about alcohol, and that was one of my drugs of choice. And the alcohol industry, technically everything's legal and it continues to sell, and we have DUIs and drunk driving arrests and the morbidity rate on the highways. They're not going down, they're going up, and you'd think that people would be a little smarter. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know what it's going to take to have a paradigm shift, or some sort of systemic change. But I'm glad guys like you that at least care about, people and families are talking about it. And the company you work with, has a product to help slow things down, to get more real information in real time to those that hopefully can do something with it. So, Michael, we're going to probably have to wrap up here. And I know Fred, we haven't seen Fred today because he's got one of those real expensive cameras that's very sensitive to heat. So we can't see him. I don't know. Fred, can you still hear us? Is your microphone melted as well, brother? All right, he took a nap. So Michael, tell us how people can get a hold of you and your company, and if they have questions for your group, because I think knowledge is power. I mean, I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. I'm not even sure my kids will. They're in their 30s. But I know if we stop talking about it, it's not going to get. I tell families it's not going to get better on its own. Your child who's out of control at 35, if you just tell them to stop, they're not going to get better on their own. And, again, the numbers continue to grow globally. And I think the cartel, they're shifting a lot of their business to other parts of the world where they don't have the kind of criminal justice system that's really getting more aggressive than ever. And, and I love that idea, 10 years in prison if you're caught selling fentanyl that kills somebody.
Right.
I'm oversimplifying what that is, but the fact that, there's like zero tolerance now for that kind of, and it's probably going to be a college kid that's giving their buddy some stuff. Not going to be the main distributor, that's for sure. They're hard to find. So
yeah, it's there's a lot of work.
Tell us how we get a hold of you and anything else you want to share, and I'll let you have the final word. Then I'll take.
A lot of work still needs to be done, but anyone who wants to reach out for me in terms of consulting or learn about drug detection, identification equipment, can reach me at michael.brown, that's BROWN, at Rigaku, RIGAKU.com. Also on LinkedIn, or they can simply dial in to the Opioid Matrix podcast and catch some other discussions that you and I have had on this topic, Scott. But one thing we didn't touch on, unfortunately, we didn't have the time, but sanctuary cities. America split down the middle between blue and red states. Sanctuary cities are protecting drug trafficking. They're enabling drug trafficking. They're providing an umbrella, saying ICE and the police are not good. Mayors and governors are fighting the government on enforcing the law. But drug traffickers and Sinaloa Cartel and the CJNG are setting up hub distributions in sanctuary cities because they know they can bring drugs in, distribute them at a lower level, and nobody's going to be arrested. Or if they are arrested, they're going to be released, just like in New York City. Colorado, D.C., Philadelphia, California. People go in and they come right back out. Even if they're illegal and they get caught selling drugs, they're released back into the community. So the cartels know America is divided politically on the issue of drug enforcement and locking people up and deporting them. So why would they stop? They're just going to send more drugs to those cities, and then you're going to see the increase in homelessness, increase in addiction, and the increase in overdose or poisonings resulting in a fatality. So America has to figure out, we need one policy. Everybody needs to be on board with the same policy, Republicans, Democrats, because Americans, Republicans and Democrats, are dying, and our children are dying, and we're squabbling about policy. That has to be fixed first before anything else can be fixed. So again, hey, Scott, appreciate you having me on the show. We need more real truth conversations like this to let the American people know what's really going on. And these aren't just sound bites to make it sound like we're winning a war, and I think we're actually losing.
Yeah. I think maybe what we'll do next time around, next month or two, Michael, once you're done with your world tour and your band takes a vacation, is get in and talk about, here's a problem, here's a solution, here's a problem, here's a solution. Because when you talk about, sanctuary cities and the fact that the cartels, and I believe they've got to be well stationed in the U.S. I mean, it's such a big market. Why not? They sit down the hall from big law firms, or they sit down the hall from big, I'm sure some of those law firms and CPAs may be working with them, in a legitimate storefront. And then it is legitimate. And that's the way we work business. Their money may be, offshore, but still it's a legal business. They got a license, and maybe they're paying taxes, maybe they're not. But it'd be good to get into some of that policy stuff and talk more about it. That's really not my forte. So, but I think you bring up a good point. I think we need to raise the bar with our information sharing as well, to kind of arm those, if you will. And one of the things I worry about when I listen to you share is what's the morale like with the people who are in this fight on the streets, with law enforcement, criminal justice, sworn officers, people who are undercover in dangerous circumstances around the world that are trying to help. And then they see the outcomes of,
you've got Americans that throwing rocks at CBP officers. You've got people trying to assassinate ICE officers. There is a civil war coming from Americans against Americans in law enforcement, especially in sanctuary cities. Again, it goes back to sanctuary city policies, and the policies those government support is encouraging lone wolf actors to unify, to come together and attack law enforcement. So, I talk to agents all the time. They're like, Mike, we're putting our lives on the line, trying to fight a battle that no one wants us to win, right? They're shooting at us, throwing rocks at us. They want to come to our house and kill our families. And we're not even allowed to swing at these guys. We got to take the punishment. We got to let people spit on us. We got to suck that up and go on. But that's the kind of people we're dealing with. We talk about law enforcement, highest morale, honor, loyalty, and the country first. But how long can those guys and girls hold back?
Good point. Well, everyone, thanks very much for being with us today. On behalf of myself, Scott H. Silverman, Fred Carroll, and our special guest, my brother from another mother, Michael Brown. Thank you, Michael, for being here today. And keep up the good fight, and, keep me in the loop. The smarter you can keep me, the more I can be a resource for you. And by the way, when we're done, be sure and email Jen. Let her know you showed up and you made it, because I don't want her to worry about you.
I'm all over the map here, brother. But good to see you. Hopefully we'll get Fred on the next one.
Yeah.
But let's keep the messaging going, because this is the kind of information American people need to hear.
Thanks. All right, man. Hang on for just a second so we can wind things up here. And